2025 has witnessed some of the most devastating violence across the African continent in recent years. From Sudan's bloodiest week since civil war erupted to electoral turmoil in Cameroon and Tanzania, millions of ordinary people are caught in the crossfire. November alone has seen attacks on civilians, disputed elections sparking mass protests, and militant groups expanding their reach into new territories. Behind each headline lies a humanitarian catastrophe that's forcing unprecedented numbers of people from their homes. The refugee crisis continues to worsen as families flee violence, only to face uncertain futures in overcrowded camps or dangerous journeys to neighboring countries. Hello and welcome. You're watching Statecraft with me, Geeta Mohan. The final week of October 2025 will be remembered as the deadliest period in Sudan's ongoing civil war. Over 2,000 people lost their lives between 26th of October and 1st of November. These aren't just statistics. They represent mothers, fathers, children, and elderly people caught in a conflict not of their making. On the 26th of October, the Rapid Support Forces captured Fasher. This city had been under siege since May 2024. It was the last stronghold of the Sudanese armed forces in the entire Darfur region. When the SAF withdrew overnight, they left behind a civilian population that had endured months of bombardment and starvation. What followed was a nightmare. Reports suggest that approximately 1,300 people were killed in Fasher within just the first few days of RSF control. The violence was systematic and brutal. World Health Organization confirmed that at least 460 patients were murdered when RSF militants stormed the Saudi maternity hospital. Think about that for a moment. People seeking medical care, new mothers, vulnerable patients, all killed in what should have been a place of safety. Meanwhile, in North Kordofan, the strategic town of Bara fell to the RSF on the 25th of October. Up to 300 civilians were killed there, including 5 volunteers from the Sudanese Red Crescent Society. These were humanitarian workers trying to help their communities. Their deaths highlight how no one is safe in this conflict. The human cost extends far beyond the immediate violence. When civilians learn the RSF is approaching their area, they flee. They've seen what happens when the RSF takes control. After Wad Madani fell to the RSF in December 2023, over 500,000 people were forced from their homes. That's 500,000 people who had to abandon everything they knew overnight. Close to 2,000 civilians managed to escape Bara after it fell, fleeing to El Obeid. But arriving in another city doesn't mean safety. It means joining thousands of other displaced people competing for limited resources, shelter, and food. Sudan's displacement crisis has become one of the world's largest, yet it receives far less international attention than it deserves.
ما في علاج ما في دواء ما في أي حاجة تاني خير الجردل والحاجات اللي عدونا ده وأنا هنا طلعنا بس جلباب وسفنجة جلباب وتوب بس بدون قرش بدون نعال بدون أي حاجة ما عندنا بدون بطانية بتاع خطة ما عندنا ولا حاجة.
The pattern is clear and devastating. When the RSF attacks villages, they target specific ethnic groups. In November 2024, at least 70 villages were attacked. The RSF killed at least 316 civilians and forced thousands more to flee. These weren't military targets. They were farming communities, families living in ancestral lands. Where do all these people go? Many flee to already overcrowded camps. Others attempt dangerous journeys to neighboring countries like Chad, South Sudan, or Egypt. Families are separated. Children lose access to education. Women face increased vulnerability to violence and exploitation. The displaced often live in makeshift shelters without adequate water, sanitation, or health care. Disease spreads quickly in these conditions. Malnutrition becomes common, especially among children.
المشاكل كان في الفاجر كان كثير و يعني شيء محسب لأن يومي في دانات وفي كتيل وفي شريط وجو برضو كان يعني كثير ناس باكلوا ومباز وكده وخايتوا الحمد لله يعني هولنا كده ربنا سلمنا خرجنا بسلامة وبرضو يعني كان ساعة الخروج ذاته كان صعب لأن توفير بتاع مواصلات كان ما في يعني اللي ركبنا دابة وبعد ذاك يعني من هلة للهلة يعني ساعة بعد مرات بالليل بعد مرات بالنهار بعد مرات كمان يعني جو خطورة كده كمان تلقوا لكم الخور كده تعمل لكم يوم يومين كده بعد ذاك يهو يسن الكتم الحمد لله كمان وجدنا العربات.
Now let us move to another country, Cameroon. President Paul Biya has ruled Cameroon since 1982. That's over 4 decades in power. So when presidential elections were held on the 12th of October 2025, many Cameroonians hoped for change. The main opposition candidate, Issa Chiroma Bakari, claimed victory before official results were announced. His supporters believed him. They'd voted. They'd seen the turnout. But on 27th of October, the Constitutional Council declared Biya the winner with 53.6% of votes against Bakari's 35.19%. Many people simply didn't believe these figures. They felt their votes had been stolen. What followed was predictable yet tragic. Demonstrations erupted across the country. At least 48 people died. State forces used live ammunition on protesters. They beat up demonstrators. Mass arrests followed. In cities like Douala, Garawa, and Marawa, frustrated citizens barricaded roads, burned ruling party buildings, and clashed with security forces. Bakari responded by calling for dead city lockdowns starting 3rd of November. These lockdowns bring public life to a complete halt. They're a form of protest familiar to Cameroon, particularly in the Anglophone regions where separatists have used them for years. In areas of strong opposition support, cities become ghost towns. Now, electoral violence creates its own refugee crisis. Families flee neighborhoods where security forces are conducting sweeps. Young people who participated in protests disappear, arrested, or go into hiding. Some cross borders to avoid detention or even worse. The Minister of Territorial Administration, Paul Naji, has threatened legal action against Bakari for inciting unrest. This creates a climate of fear. Opposition supporters worry about being targeted. Some choose to leave rather than risk arrest or violence from security forces. Let's head over to Mali now. In October 2025, violence in Mali's Sagao and Sikasso regions reached record levels. The Al-Qaeda affiliate known as Jamaat Nasr al-Islam wal Muslimin or JNIM has been running a fuel blockade. They restrict fuel deliveries and disrupt movements on major roads connecting Bamako, Sagao, and Sikasso. The Malian armed forces, working with Dozo militias, launched operations to break this blockade. But these operations were marked by horrific atrocities. On the 2nd of October, at least 28 civilians were killed in Kamona. On 23rd of October, over 30 cattle owners were killed near Markala. These weren't militants. They were ordinary people caught between two forces.
There's a lot of crimes committed in Mali, human rights crimes. There's a lot of people raped, attacked, killed. Families are separated. No doubt about that. I think the situation has not changed. As we said, that it is sometimes difficult to really pinpoint who are the perpetrators.
The military relied heavily on airstrikes and drones. They claimed militant losses, but the blockade remains in effect. Meanwhile, JNIM continued attacking army escorts, burning fuel convoys, and targeting police posts. They set up choke points, abducted people, and intimidated anyone trying to travel. JNIM also kidnapped foreigners. 2 Egyptian nationals were taken. In September, they abducted 2 Emirati hostages south of Bamako. Those hostages were released in October after a ransom payment estimated between 50 and 70 million US dollars. That money will fund more violence, more blockades, more instability. The dangerous environment has prompted about a dozen countries to advise their citizens to leave Mali. The United States, Germany, Japan, and the United Kingdom all told their nationals to get out. When multiple governments issue such warnings, it signals just how bad the situation has become. But what about Malians, who can't simply board a plane and leave? Rural communities face impossible choices: stay and risk being caught in crossfire, or targeted by militias, or flee, losing your land, livestock, and livelihood. Thousands have fled the Segao and Sakasso regions. Many head to Bamako, but the capital is hardly safe either. JNIM operates in areas close to the city. Others attempt to reach neighboring countries like Burkina Faso, Mauritania, or Senegal. These journeys are dangerous and expensive. Families often must split up, sending those most vulnerable ahead whilst others stay to protect property. Displacement camps in and around Bamako are overcrowded. Resources are stretched thin. International aid organizations have limited access due to security concerns. Displaced people struggle to find work in cities already facing economic challenges. Let's move to Niger now. Since the July 2023 coup, Niger's security situation has deteriorated. Militant groups that once operated in peripheral areas are now reaching into population centers. This represents a dangerous evolution in their tactics and capabilities. On the 21st of October, suspected Islamic State Sahel province militants abducted a U.S. citizen from his residence in Niamey, the capital. This missionary was taken from what should have been a secure area. If the capital isn't safe, nowhere is. Days earlier, on the 18th of October, ISSP attacked security positions and government buildings in Bagarawa in the Tahawa region. They killed at least 2 security personnel and looted local offices. These weren't hit-and-run raids on remote outposts. These were sustained assaults on administrative centers. In southwestern Niger, JNIM has been equally active. Throughout October, they carried out attacks in the Dosso region, killing farmers and burning homes. They destroyed telecommunications, infrastructure, and municipal buildings. They're systematically dismantling the state's presence in rural areas. JNIM is also expanding ideologically and geographically. They released propaganda videos targeting specific religious communities. On the 28th of October, they claimed their first attack inside Nigeria in Kwara State, killing a soldier and seizing weapons. The Benin, Niger, and Nigeria borderlands have become critical zones for militant activity. Communities in these areas face constant threats. JNIM plants IEDs. Both JNIM and ISSP conduct raids. State forces struggle to provide protection. Families in border areas are abandoning their villages. Some cross into Benin or Nigeria, becoming refugees. Others move to larger towns within Niger, joining the internally displaced. Either way, they leave behind everything they've built. Niger was already hosting refugees from Mali and Nigeria before its own security collapsed. Now, it's generating its own displaced population. Camps meant for refugees from neighboring countries now also house Nigerians fleeing violence in their own country. Resources designed for one crisis must stretch to cover multiple emergencies. Children in these displacement situations miss years of schooling. Healthcare is minimal. Psychological trauma goes untreated. Young people growing up in camps have limited opportunities, making them vulnerable to recruitment by the very groups that displaced them. Things are not looking better in Somalia as well. On the 4th of October, 7 al-Shabaab militants attacked the Godka Jilikau prison in Mogadishu. This facility, near the presidential palace, houses al-Shabaab members and other high-profile detainees. It's also a National Intelligence and Security Agency headquarters. In other words, one of the most heavily guarded locations in the capital. This attack occurred shortly after the government lifted long-standing security checkpoints and reopened over 50 roads. Authorities claimed stability had improved. Al-Shabaab proved them catastrophically wrong. This was the third such prison attack by Al-Shabaab in 2025 alone. Somalia faces one of Africa's longest-running displacement crises. Decades of conflict, recurring droughts, and militant violence have created a massive internally displaced population. People move from rural areas threatened by al-Shabaab to cities like Mogadishu, hoping for safety. Somalia also hosts refugees from other countries, primarily Ethiopia and Yemen. Meanwhile, Somalis themselves flee to Kenya, Ethiopia, and beyond. The Dadaab refugee complex in Kenya has hosted Somali refugees for over 3 decades. Multiple generations have grown up in these camps, knowing no other home. In Eastern Africa, Tanzania's 29th October election was supposed to be a democratic exercise. Instead, it became a massacre. President Samia Suluhu Hassan was declared the winner. But what happened in the 5 days following the election will haunt Tanzania for years. On election day itself, violent demonstrations broke out in 10 regions across mainland Tanzania. Over 3 days, there were 70 separate disorder events. People targeted polling stations, police stations, government offices, and ruling party buildings. They believed the election was being stolen. The government's response was to shut down the internet by midday on the 29th of October. It stayed down until the 3rd of November. Media outlets suspended publication. A dusk to dawn curfew was imposed. Tanzania went dark, both literally and figuratively. What happened in that darkness is still emerging. Opposition activists estimate between 400 and 700 people killed by 31st of October. By 2nd of November, they put the figure at 2,000. Security forces appear to have killed dozens, possibly hundreds of people.
5 weeks after the election, the authorities still have not disclosed information on the number of people killed and the circumstances of the deaths. Neither have they disclosed information on reports of enforced disappearances. This continued absence of transparent information risks further eroding public trust and heightening tensions at a critical moment.
Images on social media show them firing at unarmed civilians. The scale of killings will undermine both Hassan and the ruling CCM party. The party has ruled since independence, but its legitimacy is now in tatters. What does this mean for ordinary Tanzanians? Increased repression seems likely. Opposition activists will be targeted. Journalists will face pressure. Civil society will be constrained. Some will choose exile over risk. Each of these conflicts contributes to Africa's growing displacement crisis. According to the United Nations Refugee Agency, Africa hosts over 7 million refugees and 24 million internally displaced people. These numbers continue to rise. The challenges facing refugees and displaced people are immense. First, there's the immediate trauma of violence and loss. Then comes the dangerous journey to safety. Many die trying. Women and girls face sexual violence. Children become separated from families. Arriving at a camp brings new challenges. Resources are stretched. Food rations are often insufficient. Clean water is scarce. Shelter is inadequate. Healthcare is limited. Education is disrupted or unavailable. Refugees can spend years, even decades, in camps. They're not allowed to work in many host countries. They can't own property. They depend entirely on humanitarian assistance that's perpetually underfunded. Children grow up without normal opportunities. Skills deteriorate. Hope fades. Host countries face enormous pressure. Countries like Uganda, Chad, and Kenya host millions of refugees despite having limited resources themselves. Local communities near camps sometimes resent the international attention and aid refugees receive while their own needs go unmet. This can create tensions. Climate change is making everything worse. Droughts are more frequent and severe. This drives rural people into cities or across borders. It increases competition for resources. It creates new conflicts over land and water. The international community's response remains inadequate. Humanitarian appeals are chronically underfunded. The UN's funding requests for African crises rarely receive even half of what's needed. Media attention is fleeting and selective. Some crises receive coverage whilst others are ignored. November 2025 alone has exposed the depth of Africa's interconnected crises, from Sudan's civil war to electoral violence in Cameroon and Tanzania, from militant expansion in Mali and Niger to continued instability in Somalia. The common thread is human suffering. The refugee and displacement crisis will define Africa's near future. Millions of people are on the move, seeking safety and opportunity. They face incredible obstacles and tremendous uncertainty. Their resilience is remarkable, but resilience alone isn't enough. These crises demand international attention and action. They require increased humanitarian funding, political solutions to conflicts, support for host countries, and addressing root causes like governance and climate change. We must remember that refugees aren't always a burden or a threat. They're people who've lost everything through no fault of their own. They deserve our compassion, support, and solidarity. Their stories need to be told. Their suffering cannot be ignored. The world must do better. Thank you for watching Statecraft.